Four young women checked into a motel in Hoover, Alabama on January 17, 2010. They were students at the Mississippi University for Women, and they were best friends. They had come to the area for a shopping trip. They walked into their room on the second floor, room 292, at about 6 o'clock that night, and then they rested and relaxed after a long day of shopping and fun. In his room just below them, a maintenance worker was also enjoying an evening in. He went outside for just a moment, and when he returned, he found that the incense that he had been burning on a table had tipped over and caught the curtains on fire. This fire spread really quickly, and soon it was taking over the whole building. The girls in room 292 smelled smoke, so they opened the door to see what was going on, but they were met with just a wall of flames. The only way out was blocked by fire. So they closed the door, and they called 911, where the dispatcher assured them that a fire engine was on the way, and it was. They could probably hear the sirens in the distance. But this motel is at the top of a very steep hill, and it was covered with wet leaves that night. So while the fire engine struggled to ascend the hill, the flames spread into the girls' room. They retreated to the bathroom, and they called their parents, and that is where they were when the ceiling caved in on them. They did not survive. I know this motel because I've been there. I vacationed there with my family in 1975, and it was there, while I was at the motel pool, that I was abducted by a pedophile. I was at the pool that morning with my mom and my three sisters, and my mom left for just a moment to change the baby's diaper. But while she was gone, he saw an opportunity, and he seized it, and he snatched me. This part of my past came up in therapy. I had started going to counseling as an adult because I was struggling with anxiety. And my counselor and I talked for weeks about what might be the root cause. And after weeks of building trust with him, I finally shared the story of my abduction. He asked me what had happened next. He asked me if we had reported it. And I told him that we had not. That might seem strange, but reporting the crime would have actually been an uncommon decision, according to RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. Their research shows that only about 25% of sexual assaults are ever reported to the police. There are a number of reasons why people don't report. Perhaps it's because 99.5% of perpetrators never go to jail or prison. Perhaps it's because the process of reporting can be as traumatic as the assault itself. But after that conversation with my therapist, where I said the words out loud, "We never reported it," I realized that I wished we had handled that part differently back in 1975 when I was abducted. And I began toying with the idea of reporting it now as an adult. I wondered if that would even be possible. I wondered if it would make sense. And honestly, I wondered what my parents would think. So I sat down to write them an email. And the more I wrote, the more I remembered how mad I was. I told my mom how mad I was at her for leaving me alone at the pool that day, and I told my dad how angry I was at him for not helping my mom that day. And then I got to the part where I said, I am going to do what you should have done for me back in 1975. I am going to call the Hoover Police Department, and I am going to report this crime. And if you're willing to be there with me, I would love it. But if you can't or won't, I am going to do this anyway. And I signed it, Love, Melanie. My dad came back with a response that was surprisingly lengthy by his standards. It said, "Count me in, love, Dad." My mom replied with a long letter of personal reflection and empathy and regret and guilt and a long list of concerns about reporting this crime at this point. It could get picked up in the press. People might read about it. And then she asked, is that motel even still there? I had wondered the same thing myself, so I started doing some research, and that's when I found the article about the motel fire that had happened just a year before in 2010. Once I read their story, it was really hard to stop thinking about those girls. I kept asking myself, what would I have done in their situation? How would I have tried to escape? Would that even have been possible? And of course, knowing what they knew at the time, the girls made the obvious choice. There was a fire engine at the bottom of the hill. They knew that help wasn't far away. But knowing what we know now, what if? What if they had wrapped a wet towel or blanket around their head and taken a deep breath and just run straight through the smoke and the flames and jump from the second floor balcony to the parking lot below? That would have hurt. They would have been burned for sure. They probably would have broken bones in the fall. But looking back, we know it's the only way they might have lived. How would you even do that, though? How would you make yourself run through smoke and flames? It would be so hard, because in moments like that, the body tells us what to do, and sometimes what it says is this: retreat, curl up and hide in the deepest, darkest place and wait. I know this instinct very well because it's what I had done after my abduction. On that day in 1975, my 8-year-old sister eventually realized that me leaving with a strange man was not normal. She went to my parents and she said, "Melanie left with a man." Of course, they panicked and they started looking for me. And all the while, I was only a few hundred yards away. He had taken me to another part of the motel, to a room with a door that wasn't locked. And after the assault, he left me alone. He said, "Don't leave, I'm coming right back." And I didn't move. That may seem counterintuitive, but it makes sense if we think about what happens in the brain of a victim during a sexual assault. At the onset of the assault, the victim's brain suddenly starts receiving terrifying information, and the amygdala, the part of the brain that's responsible for sensing danger, sends frantic messages to the adrenal glands. They begin producing stress hormones which flood the body. And those stress hormones are important. They numb the body from physical pain and also emotional pain. And they can lead to the fight, flight, or freeze effect. So of course the logical thing to do when he left me alone would have been to run, but my body was filled with those stress hormones and I was stuck in freeze mode. And then suddenly a little girl appeared out of nowhere. She looked a lot like me. She walked over to the window and she looked out, and then she looked over her shoulder at me, and then she looked back out the window. I walked over to where she was, and from that perspective, I could see my family in the courtyard looking for me. And that was all it took. Suddenly, the paralysis vanished in an instant, and I ran out the door. For years, I thought that little girl was an angel. But a more likely explanation is that I was experiencing a phenomenon called dissociation. Dissociation can happen when the body is under extreme stress. And when people experience it, they say that they see themselves from an outside perspective. So when I thought I was looking at another little girl who looked a lot like me, I might have been seeing myself from that outside perspective. I found my mother in the motel courtyard, and she whisked me back to our room, and she held me on her lap, and she cried. My dad and my sisters were sitting on the queen-size bed next to us. My mom says that I did not cry, but she says that I was shaking all over. They asked me what had happened, and I told them, and when I was done, my mom looked at my dad, and she said, "Should we tell the manager?" And my dad said, no, we're not going to tell the manager. Let's just pack up and get out of here. I was 6. My dad said the best thing to do would be to pack up and get out of there, and so we did. My family and I put our things in our Pontiac sedan, and we pulled away from the motel, as if we were the ones who had done something wrong. In my mind, the logic must be that if we could get away from the motel, we could get away from the pain. In reality, my dad was just human. He was a parent who didn't know what to do, and like so many of us in moments like that, he did nothing. He hoped that by not making it a big deal, it wouldn't be a big deal. But it was a big deal. As we pulled away from the motel, I curled up in my usual spot in the family car on the back dash of the sedan. My body and my face were pressed up against the glass of the rear windshield. And if you were not alive in the 1970s, that probably sounds like a really dangerous place to put a child, and it was, but it was also really normal back in those days. And as we drove down that long, steep hill, I realized that the pain did not diminish, but I thought we just needed to get a little further away. We pulled onto the highway, and the pain did not diminish. In fact, it seemed to be getting worse. Maybe we just needed to get a little further away. But then we arrived home, and we pulled into the carport of our house, and I faced the fact that my pain had followed me the whole way. It was not any better at all. It was worse because now it was in my home. And I remember being in the car, looking down at the floor of the carport, and I had never noticed before just how cold and gray it was. And I put one foot down, and although it was 100 degrees in Alabama that day, the floor felt like ice. And I knew the next thing I needed to do was put my other foot down. But I didn't even know how to do that. I did not know how to step into this new reality. And so I told my family that we could never tell anyone what happened at the motel that day. We would never talk about it ever again. And I took that pain and I pushed it into the deepest place in my heart. It felt a lot like what the girls did that night in the bathroom of the motel. Their story gave me the courage to come out from that back corner of my heart. I understood that when it comes to healing from trauma, the steps that we must take are the ones that hurt. And so I found myself at the age of 42 reporting a crime that had happened over 3 decades earlier. I met my parents at the scene of the crime that morning, and we drove up that long, steep hill, and we saw the burned out foundation of the motel, for that's all that's left today. It felt really weird to be back there as an adult woman, one who by all accounts is a normal, high-functioning adult. The sun was shining, I had my parents with me, the motel wasn't even there anymore. It was really hard to stay connected to the trauma that had taken place here 36 years before. But then I turned around and I saw that the motel pool is still there. And now the gate is rusted and the pool is filled with gross green water. But it is still there. Soon an officer arrived and he confirmed that he had been briefed ahead of time and that he was here to take a report of a child abduction and molestation from 1975. And then he let me talk. I told him the whole story, and he made notes. And as his pen moved across his pad, it felt like he was pulling my story out of me. And it was finally getting where it belonged the whole time. My story was getting out of my heart and into a police report. I was no longer the keeper of this awful, shameful secret. It wasn't a secret anymore. It was a public record. And the new keepers are people who are supposed to keep public records, civil servants, professional men and women with names. And I imagine that they're names like Gloria or Leonard, people whose job it is to maintain police records in white boxes in archive rooms. I'm not the keeper anymore. Gloria and Leonard have taken that off of me, and they do it for me now. Most importantly, my story was no longer shameful. When it stopped being a secret, it stopped being shameful. The drive away from the motel that day felt very different. As we drove down that God-forsaken steep hill, I realized that there's an alternative to burying your pain in your heart. You can run through the smoke and the flames. I share this story with you today because I believe that there are people who understand me and those 4 young women. I believe there are people here today who understand that. You know what it's like to hide, and maybe you even feel like your ceiling is starting to cave in on you. Maybe you're not sure that you can stay in that hidden place much longer. And if you are one of them, I want to encourage you to just think about what it might mean in your case to wrap a wet towel around your head and run through the smoke and the flames. What would it mean to deal with your guilt or your shame or your secret or your pain? What would it take to get it out from your heart and into the open? I believe that the run through the smoke and the flames, you have to do that on your own. No one can do that part for you. But hopefully you're blessed with people in your life who can be waiting for you on the other side. And if for whatever reason you don't have those people in your life, you can call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at this number. If you need courage to make the run through the smoke and the flames, take just a moment, quiet your soul, and focus on 4 words. I can do this. Thank you.